Melissa and Charles, it's great to have two people who've been on the road talking to voters about the exact topics we need to go into tonight. First, let me start with your reaction to this Oprah event that is, I believe, still going or just wrapping up, Melissa. I understand the inclination to do an event with Oprah. If Oprah called me, it wouldn't matter what it was about. I would go do it with her. And certainly there are a lot of stars lined up in this event. I do wonder, though, in terms of ginning up enthusiasm where she most needs it, do you think Oprah makes a difference?
Well, I'm just going to say I think it's a real missed opportunity if Oprah Winfrey doesn't tell every woman in that crowd to look under her seat because you get a democracy, you get a democracy, you get a democracy. Missed opportunity. I don't know if Oprah's going to play well with the demographic of young black men who are perhaps skeptical or maybe Trump curious, but I do think it makes clear that there is support within the black community, and that could be very important in translating to young black men, like their mothers, their grandmothers are all doing this, like everyone in the community is behind this. Maybe there's a reason for that, and maybe I should investigate or interrogate why I am not quite in line yet.
Can you expand on that, Charles? Is that like that sort of family dynamic, the matriarchy coming together and being like, you will vote for Kamala Harris, young black man in my family?
It does exist, and I think that in quite simple terms, that may be part of the problem because of the conversation and the way it's being had. There are a number of black men who I and Tremaine spoke to on the course of filming Black Men in America, The Road to 2024, who expressed a sense of part of the issue that they are having is the way that people are talking to them about their vote, as opposed to having conversations with them. A lot of black men have expressed feeling like folks are talking at them and castigating them for having questions, for having apprehension, for wanting to reservations, wanting to see some policy before they make a decision and commit. And so at the end of the day, you're still talking about men. And so there's a feeling in some respects of, hold on, who are you talking to like that? Well, you can't sort of shame me to the polls. That is not an effective strategy.
And you could see that in her response at the NABJ conference when she said, look, I don't take them for granted. I know I need to earn it. That seems like she's reading from the same hymnal that you're reading from, which is, don't tell people they have to vote for me. Don't shame them into it. I got to earn it.
Give me a reason why. And I think that part of the problem with Democratic messaging for some people has been, you have been selling me a vision of less last, meaning that I've survived Donald Trump one, and now you're telling me that this is going to be worse. But at the same time, you told me the same thing about George Bush. You told me the same thing about Ronald Reagan. And I'm still here. I'm not saying it's valid. I'm not saying it's valid, but I'm saying that if, for example, I'm a black male who has only seen the unemployment rate in this country be surpassed by Native American men and no other demographic, selling me a vision of less last is not necessarily the best way to go.
But again, I think one of the things that we saw when we went around the country talking to black women, it's not just black men who have questions. I think young black women also have questions. So women of my age and older, they are solidly in that camp. And they were even before the switch. Like we talked to women who said, I will vote for Joe Biden's desiccated body if it comes to that. But these younger women are, they have questions. And one of the things that's really interesting to me is they talked about some questions about police brutality. What has the Biden administration done around police brutality? And in fact, the Biden administration has done a lot around police brutality. One of the most historic executive orders, putting money into policing and police accountability. We don't really talk about that on the media because we've spent the last year covering January 6th and Trump's trials and whatnot.
Well, and police brutality, the appalling footage of police brutality continues to be generated independent of the Biden administration.
But here's another part of it, and this came out very clearly, and I think it's the same with black men. It occurred to me that this is the generation of people who grew up in schools after No Child Left Behind. So they grew up in an educational system where we were divested of music and PE and civics education. So they may not understand as clearly as other people in the media and law or whatnot that the president has very limited power over the 18,000 police departments in the country. That's a municipality and a locality issue. And so part of this, they want to see change, but they're looking to the president, and maybe that's not the person who's going to do this. So we really have to think about the way in which our electorate is being educated, what it means downstream, because this isn't just about black men. I think we're going to see this further down the line with lots of different groups.
Well, and when you account for the educational divide, that's where you're seeing the biggest cleave towards Trump. I got to say, though, there's like the case for the positive case for voting for Harris. Then there's also the case for voting for Harris as an antidote to Trump.
Sure.
And I got to wonder what you guys think of the rhetoric coming out of Springfield, directed at Springfield, Ohio. It's something that Oprah Winfrey brought up actually this evening, just a few minutes ago. I think we have the clip, if we could play it for you guys, so you can hear how she's framing it.
Ever since the debate, we feel for our fellow citizens in Springfield. Do you not think about the fellow citizens in Springfield, Ohio, the Haitian families, the non-Haitian families, everybody having to deal with this lie that has endangered the lives of Haitian people and anybody who looks Haitian? Everybody in America feels for that.
Okay, the key part of that, I think, is everybody having to deal with this lie that has endangered the lives of Haitian people and anybody who looks Haitian. We had the chair of the local NAACP chapter on yesterday, Charles, and she was saying how her grandchildren can't go to school. She's worried about them. They're not Haitian, they're black. And I got to wonder, one of the areas where Kamala Harris loses the most ground to Donald Trump is on immigration and the economy. Just to talk about immigration for a second. When you hear his rhetoric around immigration, when you hear how he's vilifying people of color in the United States, they could be Haitian, they could just be black, is that not a deterrent? Do you think that that matters when, in your experience, and granted this is before any of the Springfield stuff came up, but is that the kind of stuff that is going to make it's going to penetrate, young black men and their sort of like their information bubble?
I think the notion of Donald Trump as someone who is a racist is not something that's new or foreign to young black male voters. I think that with respect to what we're seeing in Springfield and what we saw there with those comments, it needs to be framed more broadly, and it needs to be framed under the umbrella of white nationalism. And the reason for that is because racism is one lane, but when you're talking about white nationalism, now you invite xenophobia, you invite a number of different isms into the picture to other people. And the reason why that becomes critical is because it's not just a conversation that black people or Haitian people or people who are dark-skinned Dominicans or dark-skinned Cubans need to be worried about. It is a conversation that if you are not a wealthy, straight, white male, you can be othered under this notion of white nationalism, because it is a virus that spreads, and it is a virus that Donald Trump has no problem unleashing, along with J.D. Vance, on the entire electorate. And so because of that, you have to expand the framing so that people understand this is not just a racial issue that extends to people who might appear to be Haitian in some way. This is something that potentially has the ability to affect all of us who can be othered.
The white nationalism frame, I think, also encompasses some of the issues that Harris is actually really good on, like abortion. Like, one of the things that really hasn't been talked about enough is the way in which this anti-abortion rhetoric is also accompanied by replacement theory. Like, there's a reason why you want to stop women from terminating their pregnancies, certain women, and there's a reason why you're fine with certain women, like Amber Thurman, bleeding out in parking lots. And so the worst effects of these abortion bans are going to be visited on poor women, women of color. We're seeing that. And it's now that it's also spreading to women who look like random suburban moms. And now it's becoming a real issue. But it's always been an issue for women of color. And she's made that very clear. And I think joining it to this broader message about white nationalism makes both of these issues salient. And there's a real choice here.
I mean, it also is aided by the fact that there are neo-Nazis marching in Springfield, right? When you talk about white supremacy, and they're explicitly talking about the great replacement theory as now a form of Republican orthodoxy. So the data points are there. It's just people maybe connecting them to the candidates.